Chapter 241, Cupid on Valentine's Day. The night wind bit through the Beauxbatons campus. Lucien pulled his cloak tighter and checked the newly triggered loan with a casual flick of magic. Loan, advanced fire elemental magic pattern. Repayment period 30 days. Loan effect grants the advanced fire elemental magic pattern, increases the host's fire affinity, accelerates the learning of fire magic, and boosts fire spell power by 50%. Recent loans had mostly been elemental magic patterns, exactly what Lucien had asked the system for, but what mattered most was the mission attached to them. Loan mission, Operation Valentine's Day. Use alchemy, potions, transfiguration, and other magical means to enrich the Valentine's Day atmosphere so that young men and women who long for love or who have already found partners can fully enjoy the day. Lucien frowned. The fire pattern was tempting. Only wind would remain after that. But the mission description was maddeningly vague. Enrich the Valentine's Day atmosphere could mean anything. His first thought drifted to the original story, where Lockhart staged outrageous Valentine's stunts, hiring dwarves to wear wings and play harps, enlisting them to deliver love letters and greeting cards, turning Hogwarts into chaos and causing other professors, especially Snape, to wish they could hex Lockhart into oblivion. He sent a query to the system with his mind. System, is this like the Fountain of Youth task, where you're the one to judge the results? Correct. Looking forward to the host's performance. Great. Another client-pleasing assignment. Why was he doing the work of the old man under the moon? Shouldn't Cupid be in charge of this? Lucien half smiled at the image. Alchemical dolls shaped like golden-haired cherubs, Cupid's likeness, delivering letters. The idea of orchestrated love letter deliveries wasn't bad, just needed refinement. Besides, he had been developing potions and alchemical beauty products. That fit Valentine's Day perfectly. February 14th would be after they returned to Hogwarts. At least it would be a home game. He could only console himself. If this mission required him to complete everything at Beauxbatons, it would be awkward and inconvenient. Then a soft chime announced the outcome. Ding! Loan application successful. Evaluation. Love is like a blazing fire. Now, will Cupid, the shooter of love's arrows, ever find love himself? The next morning, Lucien trudged through the snow-capped Pyrenees, letting out a sleepy yawn that melted into a puff of steam. The cold didn't help his drowsiness. Last night, Professor Shafiq had given extra lessons to him and Riemann, but Riemann was still baffled after the explanation. In the end, Shafiq surrendered, just as he had during the last preliminary selection, and let Lucien take over the teaching. Lucien was used to instructing others by now. It felt like conscription. He dug a flask of workhorse potion from his pocket and unscrewed it. One long swallow, and the potion, combined with the cold, jolted him awake. He gave a slight surge of magic and the falling snowflakes parted around him. After a bit of searching, he found his target. In a distant clearing, several colossal horses, each the size of an elephant, gathered in a loose herd. Their coats gleamed like polished gold, their manes shone silver, and their eyes burned a vivid ember red. Faint flames ran along their backs and tails, and the heat they radiated had already melted the snow around them. These local magical beasts were Abraxans. Lucien shouldered 2 wine barrels and strode toward the herd. 242, Hibiscus's reminder. 2 barrels of wine floated beside Lucien as he walked slowly toward the Abraxans. Swirling snow skirted the hem of his robes. The herd turned as one when they sensed a stranger, their fiery red eyes flashing with wariness. Hot breath steamed from their nostrils, sparking fine motes of light. But as Lucien closed the distance and his aura reached them, the tension in their gaze eased. He smiled faintly and tapped his wand. The barrel lids flipped open on their own. A little breeze from the wand carried the scent of wine across the clearing. The Abraxans inhaled the mellow aroma and relaxed completely. A couple of younger ones began to trot and stomp impatiently. They really are drunkard horses, Lucien thought, glancing at the single malt whiskey sloshing in the barrels, a favorite of the beasts. He was on the outskirts of Beauxbatons, in a vast mountain range much like Hogwarts, forbidden forest, home to all manner of magical creatures and the native Abraxan. He had come to observe them and to gather materials for alchemy and potions, with Madame Maxime's permission, of course. He was not at home. He couldn't treat this place like the garden-like safety of Hogwarts' forbidden forest. Student from Hogwarts, I suggest you don't get any closer. Those horses have poor tempers. A pleasant yet frosty voice came from behind him. Lucien didn't start or slow. He kept walking toward the Abraxans at the same pace. Thank you for the warning, Miss Delacour. About a dozen meters away, on the snow, stood a girl who seemed carved from moonlight. She wore silk school robes embroidered with 2 crossed golden wands and 3 stars, the crest of Beauxbatons. A faint silver glow haloed her, making her features look even more ethereal. Fleur's surprise flashed across her face when Lucien named her. She had been shadowing him from a distance and assumed he'd never noticed. Before she could act, 2 juvenile Abraxans had trotted up. Though not fully grown, they were already large enough to loom over him. Fleur's hand rose instinctively to warn him. Abraxans were fierce creatures, quick to resent strangers and apt to attack. But then the 2 lowered their huge heads and nuzzled his outstretched palm, clearly affectionate. Lucien flicked his wand. Amber whiskey rose from the barrels and drew itself into several clear streams. He snapped his fingers, and a small orange flame burst into being in midair. The streams passed through the flame, warming and steaming, then drifted into the Abraxans' mouths in ribbons of white vapor. Only after the beasts were sated did Lucien turn to look at Fleur. Thank you again for your concern, he said lightly, but I'm rather good with magical creatures. Fleur's brows drew together. I thought a student of Nicholas Flamel's would be entirely devoted to alchemy. Fleur spoke in English, her distinct French accent giving her voice a faint huskiness. Lucien's first reaction was to wonder if she was looking for trouble. After all, she had warned him earlier to be careful of being accidentally injured by the Abraxans. He activated the Eye of Peering magic. Faint swirls appeared in his dark green irises. Fleur's expression remained very serious, her look straightforward enough to suggest she really was only asking a simple question. He told himself she probably wasn't trying to provoke him. He also remembered what teacher Nicholas had once said. If he hadn't met Lucien, he might have taken Fleur on as a student. Guessing at her thoughts, Lucien answered in French, clear and fluent. It's all right. I'm a quick study and reasonably talented at many things. Fleur had nothing to criticize about his pronunciation, but the bluntness of his answer surprised her. She was proud and usually candid, yet someone who openly claimed talent so plainly was unusual. Because he spoke her language so well, she switched back to French herself. Her red lips parted slightly as she asked, I'm just curious, what kind of genius could earn Nicolas Flamel's recognition? She walked toward him across the white snow. As she came closer, her peerless face grew clearer to Lucien. A faint silver glow reflected off the snow and set his heart racing. He knew it was the Vila blood in her veins. Vilas were intelligent, humanoid magical beings, breathtaking in beauty, skin that gave off a soft moonlight-like sheen, hair that flowed as if moved by its own breeze. Their charm could drive men to obsession. When angered, a Vila could become a terrifying, bird-like creature, the head taking on avian features, scaly wings sprouting from the shoulders, able to breathe and hurl fire. Fleur was only a quarter Vila through her mother, but she had clearly inherited the beauty and allure. Lucien lowered his eyes and wondered if she had other Vila traits. Could she transform or use magic unique to her kind? Before he could decide, her deep blue eyes met his. The faint silver light trapped within them carried an almost intoxicating charm. Staring into Fleur's eyes at such close range stalled Lucien's thoughts, a feeling he disliked. His magic surged almost unconsciously. The black swirls in his pupils instantly expanded, growing impossibly deep. Because his Eye of Peering magic had been fused with a basilisk's magic eye, any creature that met his gaze became paralyzed. At that moment, Fleur became the first human to lock eyes with him. Unlike the biting cold of the wind and snow, a soul-deep chill bled from his eyes and spread through her, and both her body and mind began to tighten and go rigid. Wind and snow fell together. Fleur suddenly felt something warm and wet on her face. When her vision cleared, she found a massive horse's head right in front of her, its red eyes burning steadily. A small Abraxan had lowered its head and was gently licking her cheek with an extended tongue. That explained the warmth and wetness. "Are you awake?" a gentle voice asked. Fleur looked up and saw Lucien not far away, holding a silver pocket watch open in his hand. Despite the swirling wind and snow, his black wizard's robe and sky-blue scarf were untouched, and his dark golden hair lay perfectly in place, as if the storm deliberately avoided him. Fleur's eyes caught his dark green gaze, and she immediately looked away. The stiffness that had frozen through her a moment before still lingered, and her heart beat faster. Seeing her reaction, Lucien assumed she hadn't fully recovered. The Eye of Peering magic, tweaked with a basilisk eyeball, had a partial petrifying effect. Students who'd been touched by basilisk influence had described it as uniquely unpleasant. Lucien glanced down at his pocket watch. The petrifying stiffness from the Eye of Peering magic had lasted 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Had close-range eye contact strengthened the effect? Magic played a part too. Thanks to his SS-level talent, Lucien's power had been growing rapidly, almost noticeably every month or two. The petrifying effect of the Eye of Peering magic depended on the difference in magical strength between two people during eye contact. The greater the gap, the stronger the effect. Clearly, the gap between him and Fleur had been enormous. Fleur realized she wasn't surrounded by cold either. She didn't feel the wind at all. She glanced at the small Abraxan at her side, wondering whether its warm body had kept her from freezing, or whether something else had. She was about to look back at Lucien when he said, "That was an accident just now. I apologize." Before he finished, Fleur waved her hands. It's fine. An accident. Don't worry about it." She turned her head slightly, a faint flush of embarrassment on her face. She didn't understand exactly how Lucien had made her go stiff, but she guessed it had to do with their eye contact, his eyes. That close watching had been intimate, and to her, unladylike. The whole thing began with her own curiosity. Fleur's maternal grandmother was a pureblood Vila, and Fleur had inherited the kind of beauty that had drawn attention since childhood. The Vila charm in her bloodline produced an unusual pull on men. She had learned to recognize obsession, admiration, and sometimes worse in their eyes. Lucien's gaze had been different. The first time they'd met at the school gates, his look had cleared quickly. Calm, precise in a way she rarely saw in a boy his age. How could someone 3 years younger already possess such talent and brilliance that he'd impressed Nicholas Flamel and become the legendary alchemist's student? More than anything, Fleur was curious about that gaze itself, about what kind of person Lucien was. 245. Praise of Hibiscus. "All right, little one, no more booze for you." Lucien patted the now empty oak cask beside him and stowed it away with a practiced flick. The young Abraxan beneath him snorted in protest and pawed the ground twice. Though still a foal, the colt already stood 2 hands taller than the biggest Shire horse. Seeing its no liquor, no moving tantrum, Lucien chuckled and pulled a handful of specially mixed Abraxan feed from his pocket. He raised his right hand, palm upward. A crisp shk sounded. A steady flame blossomed in his palm. At the same moment, a fiery red sigil on the pad of his middle finger glimmered, sending a thread of red-gold light into the flame. He swept the fire beneath the feed. The magic in it drew the rich aroma to the surface. The sulking foal swung its head, hot tongue already reaching for the treat. Lucien's smile widened at its eagerness. Much as thunderbirds crave lightning, Abraxans are born drawn to pure fire. Fleur, mounted on another young Abraxan, rode beside him, her gaze fixed on his hand and the strange flame. After a minor mishap earlier, the two had officially met. When she learned Maxime had given Lucien leave to survey the mountains around Beaubaton, Fleur had volunteered to guide him. She couldn't explain why, but the flame stirred a quiet kinship in her, warm, calm, like greeting something of the same blood. Her own Abraxan edged closer, huge eyes locked on the fragrant feed in Lucien's hand. Lucien divided the feed and offered half to the mare, murmuring, "If you want the horse to walk, you'd better let the horse eat." His colt flung its head up and trumpeted, "Hee hee." Lucien understood perfectly. The little rascal still wanted whiskey. Alcoholics start young. Lead the way properly and finish the circuit, he promised, patting its solid neck. Then you'll get your drink. The other Abraxan swallowed its feed in a gulp and nickered expectantly. Lucien rubbed its broad forehead. "Yes, you'll get some too, but 2 casks is too much. You're still growing. 1 cask, maximum. Deal? He bargained patiently with the two foals, back and forth. Fleur watched, stunned. She heard Lucien speak fluent French, not any magical creature's tongue, yet the exchange between man and beasts flowed like conversation. Looks, gestures, tone, all perfectly aligned. Curiosity finally won. "Lucien, can you speak directly to magical creatures?" she asked. While doling out the last of the feed to the satisfied colts, Lucien nodded casually. "Sure." Something like a challenge lit in Fleur's sapphire eyes. A mischievous curve touched her lips, and she let slip a stream of airy, melodious syllables with an odd cadence. Vila song. Lucien's brow lifted. Vila speech, then. He turned and gave her a gentle smile, answering in clear French, "Thank you for the compliment." 246. Improve the beauty spring. Start. Dusk deepened. The sun's last glow slid behind the ridge, and the lights of Beauxbatons winked on one by one. A biting wind swept the campus paths, thinning the foot traffic. Only the cold gleam of enchanted street lamps and flocks of ice crystal sprites trailing crystalline tails sketched a hushed nightscape, utterly unlike the daytime splendor. Fleur tucked a silver-streaked strand of hair behind her ear and dutifully played guide as she walked with Lucien across the grounds, pointing out the elegant buildings and views. "This is the giant garden," she said. Following her finger, Lucien saw a garden that took his breath away. Everything here was scaled for giants. A colossal marble fountain at the center, its leaping dolphin sculpture nearly the size of a cottage, water curtains shimmering under the lights like flowing crystal drapes. The flowers were as large as dinner plates. The air carried a magnified, crisp sweetness, and polished megalith benches, carved with intricate star and moon patterns, dotted the winding paths, each stone easily seating 5 or 6 people. On their first day at Beauxbatons, Lucien and the others had only followed Maxime along a single route. They'd never toured the whole campus. In the past 2 days, he'd been in classes, holed up in the library, or plunged into the box world, researching a magical smartphone and the modification principles of the Fountain of Youth. He'd had no time to explore properly. Beauxbatons was filled with exquisite fountains and pocket gardens. Before they knew it, they were standing again in front of the Fountain of Youth. Clear water sparkled under the enchanted lamps, and at the center the statues of Nicolas Flamel and his wife looked serene and warm. Fleur gave a soft laugh, teasing but understanding. "This doesn't need an introduction, does it?" Lucien nodded and scanned the area. Good, nobody else in sight. Time to begin the civil engineering project. He drew his wand. At the same moment, containers of varying sizes and materials streamed from his pocket and hovered silently at the fountain's edge. Fleur blinked at the abrupt action, but she quickly guessed the reason. She tilted her head. "Lucien, did a friend from Hogwarts ask you to bring some water back?" "Yeah," Lucien answered briefly, already focused on the water. Fleur almost said that the fountain's water wasn't as miraculous as the gossip claimed, that it mostly cleaned and softened skin, didn't really grant beauty. But she remembered he was Nicolas Flamel's student and probably already knew that. She kept quiet and watched. A flick of his wrist sent over 100 tiny, glowing, ancient runes streaming from his wand tip. They weren't random sparks. They flew in precise order to every key node of the fountain, the patterns on the basin walls, the statue plinths, even the columns of flowing water, and embedded themselves silently. Then a low, resonant thrum of magic filled the air. The entire fountain, from base to statues, lit up with circuit-like blazing lines. The gentle lamplight was replaced by a vast, ordered brilliance that turned the area as bright as noon. Fleur's pupils contracted. The enormous earth-rooted fountain, stone, water and all, smoothly tore free from the ground and levitated into the air. The water still cycled under fine magical control, looked even livelier, yet not a single drop spilled. Crack, 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 crack. Crisp, gear-like sounds rang out. The glowing outline of the suspended fountain split apart before Fleur's eyes. Split apart. Stone, metal, water, magical filaments, everything fractured into hundreds of neat, separate pieces, like a colossal three-dimensional jigsaw dismantled in an instant. Each fragment hovered in its original position, held in dynamic balance by flowing, rainbow-glowing threads of magic. Fleur's mind went blank for a few seconds. Shock stole her voice. Then an incredulous shriek, pitched an octave higher than her usual timbre, tore from her throat and cut through the quiet Beauxbatons night. Why did you dismantle the Fountain of Youth? 247. The New Beauty Spring. The disassembled Fountain of Youth hung suspended by countless magic threads, its initial glow gradually stabilizing and casting a soft light over the clearing. Fleur's sharp, high-pitched scream cut the night, so piercing that Lucien's ears ached, and he moved to soothe her while he tapped his wand to fine-tune the fountain's parts. "Don't be nervous. It can be put back together," he said calmly. Fleur looked composed enough, but the sound she'd made was unexpectedly shrill. Lucien thought of what he'd heard before. When Vila get angry and shift into their avian form, their cries could be as soul-stirring as a fully grown mandrake. Maybe it was an inherited racial thing. After a moment, he added, "I discussed this with Madame Maxime beforehand." Those words worked better than any explanation. Fleur's tense expression eased. At Beauxbaton, Madame Maxime's word carried absolute authority. If the headmistress knew and approved, then this apparently destructive act must have a reason. Curiosity replaced unease, and Fleur watched Lucien with keen interest. With a light tap of his wand, the lids of the suspended containers swung open. The first items to fly out were familiar: shimmering moonstone powder, concentrated essence of beauty roses, dragon gold silk finer than a hair, yet incredibly strong, classic alchemical ingredients. But the containers seemed bottomless. Stream after stream of materials poured out. Some Fleur could only recall from blurry illustrations in ancient tomes, pearlescent ground paste of merperson scales, for example. By the time the last things came forth, she was at a loss. Slowly flowing shadow substance, several strange seeds with miniature swirling clouds inside, a tiny vial of gas that kept shifting color. She widened her blue eyes, unable to name most of it. When the flow stopped, she asked, voice a mix of uncertainty and excitement, "Lucien, are you going to adjust the Fountain of Youth?" He nodded. Fleur's face lit up. Did Nicolas Flamel teach you?" "Of course. The fountain was Flamel's masterpiece, and Lucien was his pupil." The idea of seeing what the great alchemist had passed on thrilled her, but a flash of doubt crossed her mind. If he was about to perform secret alchemical techniques, should she leave? Could she watch without prying? Then she realized she couldn't even recognize most of the materials. There was nothing to fear. Do I need to go?" she stammered. Lucien was cataloging the floating components with a quick, practiced eye. He glanced at her. Her fingers worried the edge of her sleeve, and a faint silver halo around her flickered. Perhaps Vila light fluctuated with mood? Regardless, he decided she could stay. "No need. You can stay. If you have questions, ask." His tone was matter-of-fact. Fleur blinked, surprised by the direct invite. Before she could reply, Lucien moved on. He released a vast, pure surge of magic that divided into countless fine control threads and glowing runes, each precisely weaving into the suspended parts and materials. On the wand-holding fingertips of his right hand, elemental sigils, water, fire, and earth, flared to life together, complementing one another. Instantly, everything in and around the fountain answered as if urged by a single will. The elements in the components and those floating freely in the air sprang into motion, aligning themselves to Lucien's command. Fleur felt the strange resonance between them again, clearer and warmer this time, tugging at her in a way that made her pulse quicken. Under his control, the materials underwent astonishing transformations. Some merged to form brand new alloyed parts. Others condensed into streaks of light that etched intricate runes into the fountain's inner surfaces. A few replaced damaged pieces outright. It was less mechanical repair and more alchemical surgery, metals alloyed as if alive, essences integrated, spells woven into the structure. What impressed Fleur most was not only the sheer amount of power Lucien wielded, but his uncanny affinity with the basic elements, as though they were extensions of his hands. She, who prided herself on a broad knowledge of magic, forgot to ask questions and simply watched the artistry unfold. Magic, elements, and material transmutation in perfect harmony. Slowly, the light that had spread through the contraption converged and settled. Guided by the magic threads, the countless components slid into place and fused. The elegant Fountain of Youth reassembled itself and settled back into its original form. Water began to gurgle, clear spring water running along the newly finished basin, its faint magical filigree catching the moonlight and shimmering with a dreamlike brilliance. Just as the spring resumed its gentle flow, ding! The fountain of youth has been improved. 248. New effects of the beauty spring. The fountain of youth settled back into its place, and a system notification chimed in his mind. Ding! The fountain of youth has been successfully improved. Lucien exhaled slowly. The loan for the advanced earth element magic pattern had been repaid. The upgrade had gone far more smoothly than he'd expected. Part of that was thanks to the detailed guidance on the fountain's original alchemical principles from his teacher, Nicholas Flamel. It saved him weeks of preliminary analysis and blind experimentation. The other part was that his mastery of the advanced elemental magic patterns for water, fire, and earth had given his alchemy a huge boost. Those patterns increased his affinity for and control over the elements, and elemental manipulation was the very foundation of the entire alchemical system. Fleur had finally recovered enough from the shock of watching the process to look around. Her eyes darted from the shimmering water back to Lucien's composed profile, and something unreadable flickered across her face. Pride sat at the core of her, pride born of prodigious ability, striking beauty, and a lifetime of admiration. The first dozen years of her life had been a smooth rise. The one real sting had been failing to become Nicholas Flamel's pupil when she'd visited him last summer. She had seen Lucien then, a fleeting image, the rare dark green of his eyes, and a vague, stubborn rivalry had taken root. She had come to the Triwizard Tournament's alchemy event ready to measure herself against the supposed student of Nicholas. She had expected competition. Instead, before the contest had even begun, she'd watched the chasm between them unfold. Swallowing the swirl of emotions, she stepped forward, masking everything with conversational casualness as she stared at the fountain, which looked unchanged. "Lucien, the fountain of youth doesn't seem different," she said. Indeed, the winding channels, the smooth stonework, even the statue of the flamels entwined in the center, all looked as they always had. The real transformation lay hidden in the water itself. "The appearance is the same, but the spring's essence has been altered," Lucien explained, making a few final minute adjustments with his wand. His tone was as calm and measured as if he were answering a homework question. "Now, bathing in it will produce a beautifying effect much closer to the rumors." He gave her a concise explanation of the alchemical principles. The original water had primarily cleansed and provided light nourishment. Any visible effects required long-term use and were minimal. The improved spring, however, generated continuous, gradual optimization. As people grow, factors like lifestyle, environment, expressions, and speech subtly change facial features, and those changes tend, more often than not, toward less favorable outcomes. The enhanced fountain of youth guides the user's appearance and skin texture toward the most ideal state allowed by their genetic potential. That effect was the result of an integrated application of alchemy, potions, and the transfiguration techniques Lucien excelled in. Of course, it had limits. It could only refine a person up to their theoretical upper bound. It wouldn't turn everyone into an impossibly beautiful icon. Fleur's eyes lit up at this. She sounded eager to try it herself. "That sounds wonderful. May I?" Lucien's gaze naturally flicked to her face. He shook his head slightly. "For you, this spring would probably be nothing more than a mirror." Fleur blinked, then let a small, knowing smile curl her lips. Her sapphire eyes narrowed teasingly. "You really do fit the stereotype of the British gentleman. Even your compliments are indirect." Lucien thought, rather idly, that this must be one of those old French-British differences. He favored subtler praise, and allowed himself a polite smile. Perhaps. Sometimes a subtle compliment is more to be savored. "Oh?" Fleur raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. Her silver hair caught the light. "In that case, was what I said to you in the mountains today too direct?" He remembered their exchange earlier that day, when she had spoken to him in the language of the villa. "Your eyes are clearer and more beautiful than lake water." Lucien was used to praise. Had he not been, he might have actually blushed. A spacious, sunlit classroom at Beaubon's had been turned into the written exam hall. Lucien sat by the window, his quill moving quickly over the parchment scroll. The three-school alchemy exchange was divided into two major stages, written and practical, each made up of two parts. They were in the first part of the written exam now, which tested the foundations of alchemy, properties of magical materials, and the interpretation of ancient runes. The second written section, scheduled for the next day, would probe deeper alchemical principles and design. The practical stage would require contestants, under timed conditions, to produce 2 alchemical items, one set by the professors and scored on completion and quality, the other a free creation judged on completion, difficulty, and usefulness. Besides the alchemy professors from the 3 schools, several renowned guest alchemists had been invited to judge. The questions were not hard for Lucien, more a measure of breadth and precision than of difficulty. The sheer volume was the challenge, from the ideal processing temperature for boomslang skin to the common variants of the Ansu's rune in energy-guiding arrays. He answered methodically with almost no pause and finished the whole paper in under an hour. After a quick self-check, he let his eyes fall and appeared to rest. In truth, he was sketching optimization plans in his mind for a magical version of a mobile phone. With the auxiliary acceleration of an earth element magic pattern, the main architecture was already in place. Only a few fine adjustments remained. The proctors, alchemy professors from the 3 schools, patrolled the room. Professor Shafiq, seeing Lucien's calm, drifted over and glanced at his answers. She nodded with relief. If they returned from the exchange with the champion, she thought she might be able to persuade Headmaster Dumbledore for 10 days or so of leave. Maintaining Hogwarts' image abroad was tiring work. When the 2.5-hour period ended, the parchments in front of each candidate rose and magically multiplied into 3 copies, each flying up to the hands of the 3 proctors on the podium. The tension in the hall eased into the rustle of packing and low conversations. Riman leaned toward Lucien at once. "Lucien, that last materials question. Explain the role of unicorn tail hair in a calming amulet and why it can't be substituted with mane hair. Did you mention the bit about stabilizing the core magic veins to prevent dream erosion? I don't think my answer was complete." "I did," Lucien said. "The crucial point is the pure protection quality inherent in tail hair. It resonates with moonstone powder in the amulet to amplify the calming effect. Mane hair comes from the same source, but its character is more physical protection. Swapping it can drop the effect dramatically or even induce lethargy." Riman breathed out in relief. "Okay, good. And the boomslang question. At which of the following temperatures should boomslang's skin be soaked to best preserve its resilient magic?" The choices were close. I put constant 50 degrees Celsius, but I remember somewhere saying slowly heating to 60 degrees. "That's 50 degrees constant," Lucien replied. "Snake hides are sensitive to sudden heat. The slow heating to 60 is the method for processing erumpent horn powder. It's easy to mix them up." "Phew." Riman's shoulders relaxed. "So we're fine. Seems this basic section was just a warm-up." A clear, melodious voice came from nearby. "So, if an amulet needs both protection against malicious intrusion and clarity of mind for the wearer, which rune pairs better with algaes, Sowilo or Kenaz?" Riman turned and saw Fleur, the Beauxbatons girl who seemed to glow faintly with a silver light. Her deep blue eyes were fixed on Lucien. She wasn't addressing Riman. Lucien answered easily. "Sowilo. It represents the sun, victory, and health, leaning toward light and positive protection, and it helps bolster the spirit. Kenaz is related to knowledge and light too, but it emphasizes fire, transformation, and active creation. It's less direct for steady protection and can sometimes disturb constant mental clarity because its energy is more dynamic." Fleur nodded, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. "A very clear explanation. It looks like the basic part of this exam really was only a warm-up for you." She had noticed he'd finished long before time. The 3 of them traded a few questions and answers as naturally as if they were having tea on a calm afternoon. Riman glanced between Lucien and the exceptionally beautiful Fleur, unable to stop a grin from forming. He cleared his throat and, in a voice just loud enough for those nearby, asked, "Hey Lucien, speaking of which, what are your plans for Valentine's Day in half a month?" Lucien met Riman's eye. How would he spend it? He would plan it. For everyone. Although the loan for the advanced earth element pattern used to improve the Fountain of Youth had been paid off, the fire element pattern still needed work. The system's requirement to use magical means to intensify the Valentine's Day atmosphere was vaguer than improving a magic fountain. Back at Hogwarts, he could replicate the Fountain of Youth. Perhaps it would give those nervy enough to confess a little more confidence. Subtle improvements in appearance might raise success rates. As he weighed the options, Riemann had already waved him off and started away. "I haven't finished gathering materials for my free project yet," Riemann called over his shoulder. "I need to send a letter home, get them owl delivered as fast as possible." He hustled around a pillar inlaid with ice crystal roses and disappeared into the rest of the palace, but not before calling back in a loud, boastful tone. "Oh right, if you need any advice about Valentine's Day planning, come to me. I have plenty of experience." Lucien watched his retreating back, mildly speechless. Riemann's remark, however, planted an idea. He could do a small market survey at Hogwarts. Ask upperclassmen with dating experience what people generally expected for Valentine's activities, or better yet, design an anonymous questionnaire for the whole school. When Riemann was out of sight, Fleur, who had been watching quietly, blinked and turned to him. Her blue eyes were curious. "Lucien, do you already have plans for Valentine's Day?" Lucien smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm this year's festival planner." Lucien hunched over the small desk in the Beauxbatons dormitory that had been set aside for the exchange competitors. His quill scratched across the parchment as he filled in the heading in slightly decorative script. "What are your expectations for Valentine's Day at Hogwarts?" He had already sketched out several questions below it. 1. In your ideal Hogwarts Valentine's Day, what atmosphere would you prefer? Multiple choices allowed. A romantic and warm, with magical decorations and soft lighting everywhere. Lively and fun, with group games and activities everyone can join. Quiet and private, with enchanted spaces for spending time alone. Other. Please describe briefly. 2. If small activities were held, which would interest you most? Multiple choices allowed. Anonymous blessings, delivered magically while keeping the sender's identity hidden. A photo keepsake corner, assisted by magical creatures or alchemical constructs. Experience booths for making simple magical desserts. Other. 3. What specific magical atmosphere effects would you like to see in the castle? For example, floating candles that form heart shapes, mist that changes color with passers-by's emotions, a choir of tiny fairies singing love poems, etc. Your suggestion. Lucien paused, setting his quill down and rubbing his temple. Filling out a questionnaire felt oddly familiar, like his old life at university, designing surveys for holiday events. The exchange competition would be over soon, and by the time he returned to Hogwarts, Valentine's Day would be right around the corner. He needed to know what the students actually wanted if he was going to repay the fire element loan and play Cupid properly. The system's requirement to use magic means to enhance the festive atmosphere was the easy part. That was a technical problem he could solve with careful preparation. He tweaked the wording of a couple of questions to sound less clumsy and felt marginally better. Once the questionnaire was finalized, he would ask Harry and the others to help distribute it at Hogwarts. With the basilisk and the diary out of the picture this semester, Hogwarts really did seem as safe as it ever got. A new thought pushed into his plans. Riemann had complained he was short on materials. Waiting for an owl to fly back and forth to Riemann's home would take days. Since Lucien planned to use Lu Guang's apparition to return to Hogwarts anyway, he might as well pick the materials up en route. Lu Guang had grown a lot over the past 2 years. Its long-distance apparition felt tangibly stronger now. From Beauxbatons to Hogwarts would probably only require 1 or 2 short hops, just as fast as a portkey but without the sickening spin. It would be an efficient solution. He smiled at Riemann's offhand joke about asking him for advice on arranging a Valentine's experience. Maybe another tailored questionnaire could help reach that type of student. Traditional owl mail was simply not timely for something like this. If magical versions of mobile phones became common, these things could be handled by sending a quick text. If items could be transmitted instantaneously, a Wizarding World express delivery service wouldn't be impossible either. Lucien shook his head to clear the tangents away. Ambitious ideas could wait. First things first. Perfect and promote the long-distance communication enchantments. Then, consider broader innovations that would benefit the wizarding world. One step at a time. 251. Harry and Ron's independent study Hogwarts, room of requirement. Harry checked his notes, measured out 8 grams of wiggentree bark, added it to the cauldron, stirred 5 times clockwise and twice counterclockwise, watched the potion's color shift, and scribbled another line of observations. Harry, you've been working on that potion for ages. Why not just ask Lucien? Ron asked, poking a metal owl with his wand. Besides, Lucien won't be back for another 10 days or so, Harry said, rubbing his perpetually messy black hair. I want to try to finish it on my own. It's a bit of a challenge. The potion Harry was working on was the one he'd promised Hermione could shrink and reposition teeth. They'd agreed not to tell Lucien yet, so Harry was trying to finish it without his tutor's help. After more than a year and a half of lessons with Lucien, his potion skills had improved steadily. He spent a lot of time in the library and going through the Potter's family spellbooks, and his progress was obvious. He couldn't invent entirely new potions yet. Mostly he modified and improved existing recipes, but this one wasn't beyond him. And after nearly 2 years with Lucien, Harry had picked up something else, the quiet satisfaction of making steady progress through research and experimentation. He wanted to test his own level. Ron still had the new wand the twins had bought for him over winter break, 14 inches, willow, unicorn hair core, and he no longer felt that clumsy blockage when performing magic. He had finally realized what a miserable few months he'd put up with before. The owl Ron was prodding had been made by him as well, though it was a difficult project and far from a fully functional messenger. Last Christmas, he'd seen an ordinary-looking but magical owl that had given him and Harry an important clue about Nicholas Flamel. He'd searched the owlery for days, trying to find it again with no luck, so when he set out to make a simple alchemical animal, he modeled it on that owl. The two of them worked in companionable silence for a while. When the potion had cooled, Harry bottled it, set it on the table, and tidied away his cauldron and scales. Ron stretched and leaned over to peer at the vial. "How does it look? Have you tried it on a test subject? Any effect?" he asked. Harry glanced at him. "Ron, you do remember toads don't have teeth, right?" Right. Forgot. I'm scatterbrained. I could try it on myself," Ron offered. "I'm the twins' usual guinea pig for their new gadgets. Fred and George call it, what was it, experimental funding?" Lucien told them that once. Since the twins had started using Hogwarts as a shopfront for Lucien's 7th workshop, they'd been making and selling all sorts of magical items. Lots of ideas that had stayed theoretical were actually getting made now, and their prank potions and alchemical devices were coming out fast. Ron was the obvious test subject, and to keep him from writing home to Mrs. Weasley with complaints, the twins even slipped him a few nuts and sickles as pocket money. Experimental funding, as they put it. Ron accepted it gleefully. He'd been the butt of their pranks for years. Fred once turned his teddy bear into a giant spider while Ron was cuddling it, so a little cash for the privilege seemed fair. Harry hesitated, thinking it through, then asked quietly, "Tolerance? How does it look?" They're getting smaller and whiter. Wait, no, they're getting so small they're almost gone." Harry's panicked shout echoed in the room of requirement. He watched the teeth in Ron's mouth shrink rapidly and scratched his head in alarm. He even pulled out his wand, a frantic gesture more than anything. Harry didn't know a spell to restore teeth. Ron, by contrast, remained oddly calm, waving a hand. "Don't worry," he said. "Worst case, I'll just take another trip to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey and I are practically on first-name terms." His voice had gone thin and whistling, like someone who'd lost all their teeth, and his face looked unexpectedly benign. Because he helped the twins test their new prank items, whenever a symptom wouldn't clear up on its own, the Weasley twins would haul him to Madame Pomfrey. Ron was basically a regular at the hospital wing. And although Madame Pomfrey always scolded them, the three of them never tired of it. Harry remembered how reckless Ron had been a few minutes earlier. While Harry hesitated, Ron had downed the potion in one gulp. It smelled sweet, it didn't look poisonous, and besides, Madame Pomfrey could fix anything. It wasn't bravery so much as the sort of confidence that came from habit. Harry smacked his forehead, shoved the potion tools into a shrinking bag with a flick of his wand, and started toward the door. He felt like they were always one step shy of a real cure and had no idea how to push it further. He couldn't very well go ask Snape. The very thought was unbearable. "Are you all here?" Harry's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden voice and a hand on his shoulder. He and Ron turned at the same time. "Lucien?" They both stared. Lucien? Hadn't he gone to Beauxbatons for the exchange competition? How was he back already? Ron frowned suspiciously. "George? Fred? Did you two come up with a new prank?" he asked. It was hardly an unnatural reaction. The twins had been inventing all kinds of bizarre magical contraptions that altered appearances. Lucien glanced between them, taking in Ron's whistling speech and the odd gaps in his mouth. He tapped his wand lightly. The uneven, shrinking teeth snapped back into place, straighter and whiter than before. Harry's mouth twitched. Maybe he should ask Snape, after all. If Lucien could fix teeth with a flick, then who knew when the potion would be finished? At worst, he'd have to guzzle a few more bottles of Bright Eyes potion to get rid of his glasses, he thought with a wry, inward sigh. Ron bit down a few times, testing his teeth. They felt solid. Whatever cavity had started was gone. He was also certain this wasn't a twins' prank. If Fred and George had caught him in this state, they'd have laughed, marched him around the castle on a cart, and only then dragged him to Madame Pomfrey. They wouldn't have calmly restored him with a wand. "Lucien, why are you back? Isn't the exchange still a few days away?" "Yeah, I snuck back," Lucien said, placing a finger over his lips. "I've got a few things to sort out. Could you do me a favor?" Harry and Ron were curious about how he'd managed to sneak back and what he'd been up to at Beauxbatons, but they agreed to help first. Lucien handed them several thick stacks of questionnaires and explained. "Help me distribute these to the rest of the students. Don't worry about collecting them. Once they're filled out, they'll come back here automatically." He produced a small pink mailbox and handed it to Harry, about to explain the workings of the alchemical mailbox, when a strange metallic cry cut through the room. "Gaga! Gaga!" Lucien jumped. On the floor, a small metallic contraption that looked vaguely like an owl waddled, its rear end shaking. It neither sounded nor moved anything like a real owl. Ron darted forward, blushing, and scooped it up to tuck it away. Lucien gave them a quick, almost apologetic nod. "I still need to find a couple of other people." "Thanks," he said, and slipped out of the room of requirement. Only then did Harry and Ron look properly at the questionnaires. They were full of questions about Valentine's Day. The two of them exchanged a look, puzzled. Is Lucien really into Valentine's Day? 253. Half-day round trip. An alchemy lab at Beauxbatons. Merlin's boots. So fast? That's godlike speed. Riman was hunched over his workbench, fine-tuning a semi-finished alchemy array, rehearsing for the final free refining stage. Lucien knocked, came in, and set down a leather suitcase that looked heavy. When Riman opened it, he found the rare materials he'd urgently requested neatly arranged inside. He had prepared himself mentally for a slow delivery. Sending an owl across borders, even with ministry transit, should have taken at least 3 or 4 days round trip. He had assumed he'd only get the supplies on the eve of the competition, leaving time for only a few rushed trials. But Lucien, it hadn't even been half a day, had it? He'd managed a round trip from Beauxbatons to Hogwarts and back in the time Riman would normally wait for a reply. Riman stared at the materials, their sealing magic still pristine, and his eyes widened. He didn't know exactly how Lucien had done it, but the efficiency was astonishing. "Thank you so much, Lucien." Riman closed the box and thanked him sincerely. Having the materials arrive early meant plenty of time for testing and adjustment, and his confidence for the competition rose accordingly. "You're welcome. It was no trouble at all," Lucien replied simply. He'd been back at Hogwarts briefly to handle his own business. Bringing materials for his senior had just been a small favor done along the way. Riman was tactful enough not to press him about the method. In the wizarding world, everyone has secrets they don't readily share, especially tricks for long-distance travel. Still, the incident added another layer of mystery to Lucien. Besides that almost supernatural talent, Lucien's deep knowledge and endless stream of unconventional methods impressed Riman even more. Talent might be a gift from Merlin, Riman thought, But where did such an inexplicably thorough accumulation of knowledge and that incredible means of travel come from? He knew Lucien came from a Muggle family, which only made it stranger. Riemann ran through possibilities in his head, a high-level apparition-type spell, but that was taxing and dangerous. The flu network? International lines are complex and need precise authorization. Portkeys? They must be prepared and reported in advance. He even briefly considered Headmaster Dumbledore's phoenix, the legendary bird with the ability to traverse great distances. The thought made him glance at Lucien with a hint of suspicion. Surely this junior didn't have a phoenix as a pet, did he? The idea was absurd, and Riemann shook his head. As long as the materials are here. I have an appointment, so I'll be going now. Lucien's words snapped Riemann out of his thoughts. He gave a knowing smile. This junior really was fast. He'd once seen Lucien and that star girl from Beauxbatons, Fleur Delacour, walking and chatting in the castle gardens. Half joking, Riemann offered, "Do you need my brother to help with anything? Like, give some advice?" Lucien reached into his pocket and produced a neatly folded piece of parchment, which he handed over. Riemann unfolded it. The title made the corner of his mouth twitch. Hogwarts Valentine's Day Event Interest Survey, Special Edition. Riemann's expression hovered between amusement and exasperation. He thought Lucien was being unapologetically methodical, needing a questionnaire before even going on a date. Then, remembering the other party was a Ravenclaw, he felt a little relieved. The Eagle House could be wonderfully unconventional sometimes. 254. The special characteristics of mixed race. In a delicate little garden at the edge of Beauxbatons, the accumulated snow lay like a thin layer of icing, evenly covering the shrubs, sculptures, and benches. Fleur took a small wooden box from Lucien's hand. It had been carefully sealed with a magical seal. When she cracked it open, she felt a distinct fluctuation of magic emanating from within. Her face lit with surprise and joy. Living rhizomes of purple moon vine? How did you find them so quickly? This was precisely the rare ingredient she had urgently needed, one that only grew reliably in certain hidden valleys in Britain. Not long ago, she had rushed to Madame Maxime to ask where to obtain it. She had not expected Lucien to hand it to her so quickly. "It was thanks to a friend of mine," Lucien said with a casual wave. He remembered that the plant grew in the heart of the forbidden forest and had brought some back on his way. He also thought of Liu Guang. After nearly 2 years of growth, both his and Liu Guang's strength were no longer what they had been. Maybe it was time for the little Qilin to make an official appearance. When he first entered the wizarding world, he had been cautious and had not publicly revealed the little Qilin. But everyone knew Phoenix tears healed wounds and ashes of rebirth had many uses. Everyone also knew Dumbledore had a phoenix, yet no one dared target Fawkes. Not because they couldn't beat the bird, but because they certainly couldn't beat the wizard behind it. Fleur thanked him sincerely and carefully put the box away. They walked together through the quiet, snowy garden, their conversation drifting naturally into the fields of magic and alchemy. Then Fleur suddenly stopped. Moonlight caught her profile. She hesitated before speaking. "Lucien, there's something I've been curious about. That night, when you were improving the Fountain of Youth, and even earlier, when you used fire to process the Abraxan food, I seemed to feel a very special resonance. It wasn't a normal magical fluctuation. It felt more like a call or an attraction." Lucien looked surprised. He asked her carefully about when and how she had felt it. "It's most noticeable when fire appears in your hand," Fleur added, her gaze dropping unconsciously to his right hand. Lucien considered for a moment and then raised his right hand, shifting his mind. As his magical energy flowed, the crimson sigil of fire on the pad of his middle finger glowed into view, emitting a warm, restrained light. "Yes, that's the sensation!" Fleur's blue eyes widened. A hypothesis formed in Lucien's mind. "Fleur, are you especially attuned to fire? Or rather, is your perception of the fire element naturally sharper than most people's?" She nodded. "Yes, my grandmother was a Vila, so I suppose I inherited it from her. Besides fire, I'm also quite sensitive to wind." "That explains it." Lucien nodded. He recalled records of pure-blood Vila. Under extreme emotion, they could shift into a bird-headed form and unleash scorching fire. As a half-blood, Fleur might not share full transformation abilities, but her affinity for fire was clearly inherited. The fire element Lucien drew with his sigil was extremely pure and active, which created a particular attraction for someone like Fleur, much as Thunderbird or Kelpie respond to elemental presences. The conversation turned naturally to Vila bloodlines and the special traits of mixed-blood wizards. Fleur explained that, alongside ordinary human magic, she could access a small amount of racial magic derived from her Vila heritage. It was limited and far weaker than a true Vila's power. "I only have a quarter of the bloodline," she said. "My mother can use more of the racial magic than I can, though not all of it." Mixed blood often brings unusual talents and possibilities, Lucien said, thinking of passages he had read in the history of magic. Merlin, for example, was said to carry both human and nightmare blood, which allowed him to perform many mysterious magics unique to nightmares. Some legends even claimed he could cross time through dreams and glimpse the distant future, learning knowledge and magic from eras yet to come. The classroom at Beaux Batons had been repurposed as an examination hall. The mood was a far cry from the first round. A heavy, concentrated silence filled the room, broken only by the rustle of quills on parchment and the occasional nervous breath. The second written exam tested true advanced knowledge of alchemy. Lucien unfolded his paper, scanned the questions, and his brow tightened, not because they were beyond him, but because they were beyond most of the students sitting there. Many items clearly exceeded the standard curriculum, some were obscure. He dipped his quill and the ink spread across the parchment with steady strokes. With Nicholas Flamel's unreserved instruction and the ability to consult rare, secret texts long lost to the wider world, the obstacles on the paper felt more like intriguing puzzles than barriers. Around him, however, composure was less common. Riemann felt a prickling along his scalp. The topics on the page seemed familiar, but when he tried to put them into words, the task turned out far harder than it looked. He inhaled slowly and forced himself to calm down. If it was difficult for everyone. Keeping his head was the only way through. Riemann's eyes brightened when he reached a particularly long prompt. Given that the precision of rune engraving directly affects the activation efficiency of material properties, if runes are to be engraved onto a venomhorn beast tear crystal to achieve the goal of activating only the paralyzing property and shielding the distorting toxicity, please specify the core rune selected, the sequence of engraving, and the runic pitfalls that must be avoided. He was surprised only because Lucien had discussed similar problems with him before. Several of the theoretical points Lucien had raised came back to him vividly. After a moment of organizing his thoughts, he began to write. Time ticked on. Lucien's pace was steady and efficient. He met almost no real obstacles. His attention finally settled on the last question, which read roughly, "Try to propose an idea or concept from the perspective of alchemy to alleviate the pain and symptoms of ferocity during a werewolf's full moon transformation." His pen hesitated. Unlike the rote technical prompts, this question was intentionally beyond the usual syllabus. It tested imagination, an understanding of complex magical creature physiology, and the capacity for cross-disciplinary innovation. Werewolves were a tragic, cursed group. True-born cases were exceptionally rare. Most sufferers had been infected by a bite. The full moon transformation brought uncontrollable change, blinding ferocity, ravenous bloodlust, and agonizing physical upheaval. That torment isolated them. Fear and scorn from the wider wizarding community compounded their pain, trapping many in poverty and social exclusion. The Wolfsbane potion, a breakthrough in potionology famously publicized by Damocles Belby, allowed a werewolf to retain awareness during transformation. It was a landmark invention. Its manufacture, however, was fiendishly complex and expensive, and stable suppliers were scarce. To werewolves scraping by, Wolfsbane was effectively a luxury. Without access to the potion, a werewolf faced guaranteed loss of control on the full moon night, which only deepened social discrimination and made it harder to re-enter mainstream society. Employees refused to hire them, neighbors shunned them, and the cycle fed on itself. Lucien let the weight of that reality settle. The lone requirement of the zero stipulated selling alchemical items or potions of a certain value. Wolfsbane indisputably fit that category. A complete cure for lycanthropy might be beyond reach, but if the existing wolfsbane formula or production process could be improved, if steps could be simplified and the demands for rare, costly ingredients lowered so that the potion could be produced reliably and cheaply, then its accessibility could be widened and its social benefit amplified. He set his pen to the page and began to outline possibilities. Modifications to extraction methods to increase yield, catalyst substitutions that preserved efficacy without rare reagents, and runic stabilization techniques to reduce the potion's dependency on precise environmental conditions during brewing. Each idea would need experimental validation and careful ethical consideration, but the aim was clear: make wolfsbane attainable to those who needed it most, and in doing so, chip away at the vicious cycle that turned a curse into a life sentence. 256. First communication. In the temporary dormitory Bobots had prepared for the Triwizard Champions, the air was thick with the bittersweet scent of potion ingredients. On the workbench in front of Lucien, 2 cauldrons sat over steady blue flames. He had just dropped the prepared wolfsbane aconite into the left-hand cauldron with pinpoint precision, then glanced at the quill hovering beside it, automatically recording every step and reaction of the brew. As soon as the written exam ended, Lucien, who had scored full marks, had returned to his room and begun brewing the wolfsbane potion, eager to test the ideas that had struck him during the test. 1 cauldron held the textbook wolfsbane. Every ingredient and step followed exactly. The other was Lucien's own modification, several components adjusted in type and quantity. The potions gurgled, louder one moment, softer the next. Both had reached a steady boil, but their colors and consistencies were already diverging. Lucien watched, waiting for the final precipitation stage. Ping. A crisp chime cut through the small room. It wasn't a system alert. Lucien pulled a palm-sized notebook from his pocket. Its dark blue soft cover was set with a glassy crystal. Inside the crystal, a faint green dot pulsed in a steady rhythm. "Message incoming," Lucien murmured, tapping the crystal with a fingertip. He opened the notebook. Though it looked thin, the pages rustled as if there were far more sheets inside than the covers suggested. The book stopped at a particular page. The blank paper rippled like water disturbed by a stone. A face struggled to form amid the ripples. Messy black hair, round glasses, bright green almond-shaped eyes. It was Harry. The image froze. For 3 or 4 seconds, it remained still before a blurry hand slapped over the picture, accompanied by several vibrating thuds. Another 7 or 8 seconds passed, and a broken, crackling voice drifted weakly from the page. "Lucien, can you hear?" Lucien shook his head. The farther the distance, the worse the signal. Obvious relay station problems. He set the technical questions aside and tapped the page with his wand. Harry's face vanished and a clear input box and cursor appeared. Text mode. "Harry, let's use text. Finish sending the questionnaires?" He typed. This time the reply came quickly. Barely 2 seconds after Lucien finished writing, Harry's crooked but legible handwriting appeared. "Okay, all sent." A simple line-drawn smiley followed. More text bubbled up almost immediately, brimming with excitement. "I just had to try the 6 notebook you gave me. It really lets people talk from far away? Like a phone? So cool." A star-eyed, delighted emoji accompanied the sentence. Lucien couldn't help smiling at the letters and tiny emoticons. The kid's speed in accepting and mastering this 6 mobile was astonishing. What they were using was the first-generation long-distance communication device Lucien had recently designed and built with alchemy. Within the same county, it could maintain fairly stable, real-time text and image exchange. Across countries, though, image transmission suffered severe lag and stuttering. Text mode fared better, but still showed a slight delay. The farther the distance, the worse the attenuation. To achieve truly fluid magical communication, he would have to upgrade the notebook and construct relay stations, an enormous and intricate alchemical project. Still, even unveiling this current version of the 6 phone would be more than enough to secure him a decisive advantage in the Triwizard tournament. Lucien read Harry's messages again and set the wand down, already cataloging the improvements he would need. At the workbench, Lucien held a quill and wrote smoothly in the open notebook. A text from Harry blinked in, relieved, jaunty. "The questionnaires went out faster than I thought," it read. Everyone's pretty curious about this survey. And, and there are vouchers, Lucien added aloud with a smile as he scribbled the next line. That was exactly the little tactic he'd planned. Each completed questionnaire came with a Workshop 7 voucher that could be used as a discount on purchases. The young wizards got a bargain. The spent galleons and sickles flowed back into Lucien's coffers, and the real objective, the loan progress for the fire elemental magic pattern, the Emerald Tablet loan, advanced all the same. He'd also had George and Fred leak some news early, giving out samples. Small cosmetic charms with simple beauty effects, and previews of new items being prepared for Valentine's Day. Vouchers encouraged purchases, product previews piqued curiosity, and the questionnaires collected the young wizards' opinions about Valentine's Day to help tailor the upcoming Fire Elemental Magic Pattern loan. It was killing several birds with one stone. Soon the pages were filled with the alternating handwriting of Lucien and Harry. Then, like writing washed away by rain, the ink faded until the paper lay blank again, ready for fresh lines. The previous conversation hadn't vanished, though. It could be recalled at any time with a single recall command built into the notebook. Lucien had borrowed liberally from the familiar features of QQ and WeChat in his previous life to give this little notebook practical, modern functions. Of course, the first-generation product had its limits. Each specially made sheet of communication paper could be bound to only one fixed contact. To add a new friend, you had to use a new sheet, and creating a multi-person chat consumed an entire sheet. Those so-called disadvantages, however, glittered as advantages in Lucien's mind. Apart from the cost of the notebook itself, selling sheets of communication paper was where the real galleons were to be made. What surprised him most was the system's categorization. A single sheet of communication paper registered as an independent item type in the system, an item 9. The loan task for the Emerald Tablet required selling 30,000 units of item 9s or item 12s and earning a cumulative total of 150,000 galleons. If a single sheet of communication paper counted as an item 9, the sales target suddenly looked much more attainable. That said, reaching 150,000 galleons still demanded some high-end, high-priced offerings, things like the famed Dongfeng broomstick. He designed a luxury custom edition of the communication notebook, naturally with enhanced functions, aimed at the purebloods who prized status and refinement. The quill paused as another idea slid through his head, and he muttered to himself, half amused. Maybe, even the communication paper itself could have a luxury custom edition. He could use finer materials, embed tiny family crests, increase the refresh speed for messages, features designed precisely for the pureblood clientele who wanted dignity and exclusivity. The thought made him raise an eyebrow. It felt a little ruthless to monetize even the paper itself. But those details could wait. First things first, finish the Emerald Tablet loan. How best to improve products for the magical world could be sorted out later. Lucien shook his head and refocused. Once this communication notebook officially debuted at the exchange competition, with its subversive features, it would cause a sensation. The influence of the 3 major wizarding schools radiated across the European continent. All eyes in the various magical worlds would be on the event. If the product was striking enough, it would likely sweep through wizard society across Europe in no time. And since Europe was the center of the wizarding world, the ripple effects afterward would only grow. He looked at the blank pages before him and imagined them multiplied. Countless sheets of communication paper, forming an unprecedented, intimate, instant network of communication across the magical community. 258. Animagus, one of the fantastic beasts? In the mountains around Beauxbaton, the snow had begun to melt under the sunlight, only to be replaced by a sharper, more cutting chill. In a leeward clearing, Fleur held her wand. A faint silver halo shimmered around her. "I'm starting," she said. She flicked her wrist, and the wand traced a smooth arc. Crimson flames erupted from the tip, dancing around her like a tamed silk ribbon. Fleur's lips parted, and she spoke, not in ordinary spells, but in the rhythmic language of the Vila. Nearby, Lucien watched in silence. Tiny black vortices had opened in his eyes. The eye of peering magic was already active. As the Vila words filled the air, the pure crimson flames took on a moonlit sheen, slowly suffused with a flowing silver radiance. The red and silver fire intertwined and grew more agile, drawing brilliant bands of light through the air, sometimes blooming into flowers, sometimes stretching like wings. Light and shadow wove together, dreamlike. Against that backdrop, the young woman's beauty seemed to gain an otherworldly radiance. But Lucien's attention was fixed on Fleur's magic circuit, and he sighed softly. Truly wonderful. What amazed him was not the form or color of the flames or how obediently they moved, but the quiet changes occurring in Fleur's magic circuit as seen through the eye of peering magic. Normally, a wizard's magic circuit resembles a tree with clear veins, trunk, roots, leaves, and condensation points like fruits or clusters. Fleur's circuit had begun like any other. Now, as she abandoned conventional spells and drew on the Vila gift in her blood, that tree altered. The terminal branches and leaves gradually lengthened and split, transforming into a delicate, feather-like structure. Around the edges of the whole circuit, two faint concentric rings of silver light appeared, revolving slowly like miniature moons. Could possessing specific magic circuit characteristics allow one to cast corresponding racial magic? A wizard with magical creature blood. Lucien's mind jumped to Hagrid. The half-giant's lineage came to mind at once. When they'd met earlier, Lucien hadn't scrutinized Hagrid with the eye of peering magic, nor had he seen Hagrid perform either wizarding or giant-specific magic. Would Hagrid's magic circuit show similar changes? Now that the Chamber of Secrets incident had been resolved and the Ministry had permitted Hagrid to carry a wand again, Lucien thought he could find an opportunity to ask him. That thought nudged loose a concept Lucien had long shelved. He had once dreamed of becoming an animagus that took the form of a magical creature, but the idea had always required a total reconstruction of his entire magic circuit. One small mistake could be catastrophic. Watching Fleur's partial, controllable adaptation of her circuit, tightly linked to specific racial magic, was like seeing a lamp suddenly lit in the dark. Perhaps I can try a different approach, he mused. He stared at the figure dancing in the silver-red flames and at her strangely beautiful, evolving circuit. A tentative research path formed in his mind. There was no need to aim straight for a dragon or a phoenix. He could begin by studying wizards with magical creature blood, people like Fleur and Hagrid, and the localized deformations that appeared in their circuits when their bloodline powers were triggered. If he could understand the principles behind those transformations and how they produced magical effects, he might be able to extend the method from a point to a plane, from the local to the whole. The first step is always the hardest. If he could make that initial breakthrough, learning and mastering the circuit changes tied to bloodline or special talent, then the possibility of becoming an animagus that truly took the form of a magical creature might no longer be a fantasy. Lucien and Fleur walked back to the Beauxbatons campus together. When they reached the central courtyard, they stopped, caught by the bustling scene before them. Beside the newly modified fountain, a winding queue had formed. At a glance, it was almost entirely girls from Beauxbatons. They seemed undeterred by the lingering winter chill, faces bright with anticipation, each holding delicate bottles and jars to be filled with the spring water that people said had gained a new life. The air was full of excited chatter and laughter, as if even the stubborn snow in the courtyard were melting faster because of their energy. Word had clearly spread. Some observant students had noticed genuine beauty-enhancing effects from daily use, and the news had passed from hand to hand until this lively scene emerged. Fleur watched the crowd. This little frenzy brought about single-handedly by the person at her side, with a knowing, teasing smile. "It looks like you won't have to worry about fetching spring water for your Hogwarts friends anymore," she said. "With your skills, you could probably build one yourself when you get back." Having seen Lucien dismantle and reassemble the fountain that night, Fleur had no doubts. Lucien's eyes drifted to the statue of Nicholas Flamel and his wife, standing together in the center of the fountain. "This fountain at Beauxbatons means something different," he said. "It was built by the headmaster himself and is part of the school's history and tradition." That was why, when he completed the system's modifications, he had deliberately left the exterior untouched. Still, In his head, Lucien was already drafting a blueprint for the fountain he might reproduce at Hogwarts. He imagined a design freer in style, perhaps with touches that reflected Hogwarts' character. The students' enthusiasm before him seemed to promise the future success of such a project, and it might even be more popular back home. After all, Beauxbatons students were used to the idea of a magical fountain. For the young wizards at Hogwarts, it would be something entirely new. It's no surprise they're queuing, Lucien mused, a small smile appearing at the corner of his mouth as another thought occurred to him. But this spring water might have an unexpected benefit for the boys at Hogwarts. Oh, Fleur lifted an eyebrow. Lucien adopted a mock-serious tone. It's gentle enough not to harm the scalp or hair roots. He tapped his own hairline as if making a point. You know, British men have a common, altitude anxiety. Genetics plays a part, but water quality can hardly be blameless. Seeing how Snape's greasy but thick black hair had survived, Lucien suspected that part of it was simply that the old man didn't wash his hair very often. Fleur was stunned for a heartbeat, then burst into laughter, quickly covering her mouth as her shoulders shook. She tried not to imagine Lucien in middle age, still handsome perhaps, but with a receding hairline, and failed. Lucien rubbed his chin as if he'd stumbled on a business idea. Honestly, there's a market for specialized hair care potions or alchemical treatments, with this water as a base. Fleur finally stopped laughing. Her blue eyes danced as she resumed their playful banter, but with a touch of serious prediction. At this rate, in a few decades, Hogwarts students might take pride in the fountain Lucien Grafton built. Lucien considered the thought seriously for a moment, then found himself imagining the possibilities. Should he really put his name on it? Maybe even commission a statue. 260, a branch in France? Lucien stood casually with one hand in his robe pocket, watching from the edge of the gathering as a cluster of young witches drew attention like moths to a candle. He could feel, almost physically, the pull their excitement created. The aura coming from the girls was richer and more intense than anything the boys gave off. Anticipation, delight, a touch of rivalry, the longing for their own little luxuries, even the thrill of sharing secrets with friends. The range and the strength of those emotions were striking. Whether in the wizarding world or among muggles, women's appetite for consumption and their emotional projections were simply more active. He thought of the sales reports from the 7th workshop in Diagon Alley and the Weasley twins' comments. Female customers always contributed a larger share. If he could launch some targeted items, cosmetics, accessories, or other small indulgences, at Beauxbatons, he could probably secure a foothold quickly. The thought flashed through his mind, but it was fleeting. Lucien had few connections at Beauxbatons, and his network there was nearly blank. The only person he could really count as familiar was Fleur. Asking her to help with sales wasn't realistic. Besides, Beauxbatons' rules and discipline were stricter than Hogwarts, with tighter limits on students' behavior on campus. Observing Fleur over the past days had revealed another subtle fact. Her social circle at Beauxbatons was, on the whole, ordinary. Among the boys there were admirers, of course, but few dared to approach her properly or converse with her as equals. Most kept their distance. The school was already majority female, and among the girls the looks Fleur received were more complicated. Genuine admiration for her beauty and style mixed with faint jealousy and resentment at her unabashed self-assurance. Close friends were few. Fleur herself seemed perfectly at ease with that. She had once told Lucien she disliked excessive, meaningless flattery and couldn't bring herself to pretend affection just to be popular. Being liked or disliked, both are perfectly normal things, she had said. Lucien remembered her saying it with her delicate chin slightly raised and a calm in her eyes that made it seem entirely natural. It made sense. Given Fleur's qualities and temperament, she neither resembled nor needed to be the sort of person who got along with everyone. Lucien didn't feel disappointed about not being able to open a small stall at Beauxbatons. A bolder plan had already taken shape in his mind. Why not open his own shop directly in the heart of France's magical world? It would be more convenient than trying to break into Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley was saturated. Securing a shop there was truly difficult. long controlled by influential pure-blood families across generations. But when it came to prime locations, permits, and connections in France's Wizarding Quarter, who could compare to his acquaintance Nicolas Flamel? When Lucien mentioned the idea to Flamel, the 6th-century-old alchemist barely batted an eye. He simply waved a hand and said he still owned a few properties in Paris's magical districts and several shops, then handed the keys to Lucien with an offer to use whichever he wanted. In fact, if Lucien hadn't politely declined at first, Nicolas might have gone so far as to transfer an entire shop to him. For a man like Flamel, who could work wonders and had long since moved beyond ordinary concerns, those properties were nothing but trinkets. More importantly, the name Nicolas Flamel represented not only wealth in France's magical community, but unmatched prestige and a vast, intricate network. Centuries of influence had let that reputation seep into every corner of the French magical world. Lucien felt that doing business in France would be far smoother than in Britain, and the more he thought about it, the more tempting the idea became.